Director General of the Securities and Exchange Commission in Nigeria. She was responsible for the regulation of Nigeria's capital markets, including the Nigerian Stock Exchange. And it was after her tenure at the SEC that the economist Arunma Oteh was appointed Vice President and Treasurer at the World Bank. And later she became chair of the respected Royal African Society in London. Her book, All Hands on Deck, Unleash Prosperity Through World-Class Capital Markets, which was unveiled in Abuja today, chronicles her whirlwind, dazzling career and the emotional turbulence that defined some of it, as well as the towering achievements that crowned it. And tonight she reflects on her book, her life and her career, her pivotal role in the consolidation of Nigeria's capital market, the sting of running up against pushback as she attempted to clean up the stock exchange, her vision for using the capital market to create wealth, and what African countries must do to claim its wealth-creating properties. And Arunma Oteh, O-O-N, joins me now in the studio. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Charles, and also for your very kind introduction.
Well, also, I mean, congratulations.
Thank you.
It really is I've glanced through, because I have a copy of it. I glanced through it, and it's very impressive. A book about capital markets and how they serve as key enablers of sustainable wealth. How did that come about?
Well, first of all, I felt that I owed the world the duty to explain what capital markets can do for society. And when most people think about capital markets, they think about something that's really for people who want to study maths or hard stuff. People know that you can raise money, but capital markets allow you to raise money, but they do more than that. So for me, I was I felt that I'd spent a career in the capital markets, and that it would make sense for me to explain what the capital markets entail. And when I say I spent a career, I could probably say I spent a lifetime, because I often explain that my career in the capital markets started as an 8-year-old girl at the dinner table with my parents, and after dinner, my father, would make me and my siblings take turns to read the annual reports of
I like that, at the age of 8.
Yes, of the companies that they had invested in the Nigerian stock market. And my mother was a nurse, my father was an engineer. They were not financial experts, and they essentially invested in the Nigerian capital markets. They bought Unilever, Nestle stock, UAC, and basically the dividends paid for my education. They worked in the civil service, so they didn't make very much money. And when they needed a little bit more money, they sold some of the stock and they made capital gains. And so when I looked back on my career in the capital markets in Nigeria, outside of Nigeria, but I've worked in global finance for many, many years, I thought, it would be important. In fact, I felt like it was an obligation to give back to society that experience that I have of the understanding of the value of capital markets. So that's from a personal point of view. From a more professional point of view, I feel that the world is in a place where people are actually looking for what is that new thing? What is that solution to where the world is? So whether it's Nigeria, whether it's the UK, whether it's the US, everyone is saying things are not quite where they should be. We still have poverty around the world. In our nation, 60% of people live in poverty. People are looking to address some of the very difficult financial challenges. We need about, I think it's probably about $3.1 trillion of funding to be able to even meet the Sustainable Development Goals. And we have 5 years to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. We need about $850 billion per year to be able to transform the continent from an economic point of view. We need about $170 billion to be able to finance the infrastructure deficit on the continent. We need about $84 billion to finance the energy, to have energy access. So even from the point of view of just finance, we know we do need a lot of money. And the capital markets provide medium to long-term patient capital that are generally reasonable. But I do make the point that there's much more. And the term all hands on deck really was something that I asked the publishers, the original publishers in the UK. There's now a Nigerian publisher, Narrativescape. And I said to them that this, for me, is almost a call to action, and I would like to be able to call this book All Hands on Deck, because whether you're an individual, you can invest in the market. Whether you're a company that is starting out, you can raise money from the capital markets for your business. If you want to expand, you can raise money in the capital markets to expand your business. If you're a government, you can raise money for infrastructure. If you're an institutional investor, and Africa has about $2.2 trillion of institutional money that is not properly being deployed and earning sufficient returns. So there is an opportunity for everybody to play a role.
Right. It's a fascinating thing. And I mean, what I find really riveting, because I'm not a finance person, I mean, as I'm sure you can probably tell, but one of the things I found fascinating is the way that it kind of changes the misconceptions that people have about business writing. I mean, most people think of it as far too boring or too difficult or too surly, but you've managed to shift the dial on those misconceptions, because your book is an extremely accessible read. I mean, people read books to be entertained, not so much to be lectured. So I'm sure they'll appreciate the fact that your book is light rather than dark. But who is it aimed at? Anyone and everyone?
So it was very intentional on my part. It was meant for the ordinary person. And I consider you probably able to read about finance given the breadth of people that you interview.
Right.
So you're not even my target audience. My target audience is the ordinary person. I actually would love a grandmother who reads in English to be able to understand this. And so I start the story around my own personal experience with managing money. The fact that, my mother teaching me about having a piggy bank. I should have brought a piggy bank to show, because I still have piggy banks in my home.
I like that. What do you put in there?
I put coins
you put your
in
pennies
Nigeria.
In there,
yes, I do.
Or something.
I do. In fact,
you stuff things in there
absolutely,
now that are much bigger.
I put pennies. I put pennies in mine.
Right.
And I actually gift young children piggy banks. Of course, in our country, it's a little bit more challenging because not as many people are using coins today.
Yeah, that's true. But it teaches them to save, doesn't it?
Yes, in England, in the US, you can put coins that are valuable in a piggy bank. So my mother, first taught me about saving whatever gift I was given in the piggy bank, and we would, at the end of a period, I think every month we would together count it, and she would then tell me she was taking the money to the bank to save for me. So that, first of all, helping people understand the value of parents investing in their children through the things that they teach them, for me was very important. So, the idea that learning to budget, learning to save, learning to invest is something that people should learn from when they're very young was something that was important to me. The second was Nigeria is a great example, worthy of emulation. And I had the good fortune of being the Director General of the Securities and Exchange Commission, the apex regulator of the Nigerian capital market. And Nigeria has a lot to teach many other markets. So for me, it was also, in a sense, an opportunity to showcase what Nigeria has done in terms of establishing the framework for a flourishing capital market. An opportunity to showcase some of the things that need to be done. In my time as the Director General of the SEC, it was a fascinating time for markets around the world. It was post the financial crisis, and every securities regulator that was appointed post-financial crisis all over the world was essentially a messiah. Your job was to come and save the market, to save, to make sure that if people lost money, to rebuild trust. And so I tell the story of how we rebuilt trust. I tell the story of how we broadened the market, how we stabilized the market, the innovative things that we did. Some of the things I'm very proud of is the licenses that we gave to 2 other exchanges, other than the Nigerian Group Exchange. You know, I talk about the importance of a market that has breadth, a market that is deep, a market that is sophisticated. But I also talk about leadership. And because I've been a student of leadership for many, many years, and for me it was very important to explain my experience as a public sector leader, but some of what prepared me for that role. And I explain it in a sense celebrating Nigeria as well, because I had the good fortune of having Nigerian parents. And all over the world today, people are realizing the value of the way that Nigerians parent. In fact, some of what is not in the book, you know, that I had shared with the publishers at the time were, you know, a conversation with Anthony Joshua around some of the influences of his parents on his life. The story I told about the 2
You mean the influences of him punching people's lights out?
No. But he told me the story publicly, so I could tell it. You know, he basically said that at some point in his career, he was living away from home. And he found that, you know, he wasn't as focused on his game, and he moved back into his mom's home.
Right.
And, you know, at 7 p.m. when his friends are around, his mommy will walk around a few times, and they know it's time to go. So he could focus on preparing himself.
You know what I find fascinating about that bit in the book, that you talk about leadership, is how, in your assessment, it's important to be resilient, dogged, diligent, empathetic as a leader. But you also talk about forgiveness as a cornerstone of effective leadership. Well, what do you mean by that?
Yes. So, but if you permit me, I'll just go back and say
so we've got about 4 minutes left, sadly, because I think we started the segment late. So I'm trying to gallop ahead.
So I basically talk about the fact that my parents are basically the reason I have the values I have. And over the years, those values have culminated in what I call the 4 C's. And that's character, compassion, competence, and courage. And I talk about things like forgiveness as part of compassion. And for me, President Nelson Mandela is the iconic 4C leader. And I talk about the fact that this is a man who went to jail for 27 years, came out of jail, and basically became the epitome of what it means to not look backwards, what a leader needs to do. You forgive, and it galvanizes everybody in a positive way. And in his case, it moved the nation forward. I talk about the importance of courage because a leader is in front. So you need to exercise courage if you need to change direction. You need to exercise courage if to go back on the things that you used to do. I talk about the fact that, you know, our nation is a nation that has a lot to offer. I grew up in the northern part of the country. I come from the southeastern part of the country. I talk about the influences of having gone to primary school in St. Louis Primary School. I talk about the influence of going to a federal government college. I talk about the influence of doing my youth corps in Uniben, and all of those in terms of preparing me. I talk about the discipline of being a Christian and the discipline of being a Muslim. I'm not a Muslim, but you know, young children are taught to pray 5 times a day. They're taught to fast. So that brings discipline, that brings resilience, that teaches you order.
Right.
And some of that we forget when we think about a nation like this because of some of the challenges that it faces. But I also talk about what it will take to try and address some of the issues that we face beyond finance.
So it is fair to say that the book is both a memoir and a study in financial sector leadership and a roadmap for understanding how capital markets can create wealth. So it's a kind of all-in-one.
You know, you're very proper in how you describe things. My objective was to make sure that everybody, non-finance people, can understand finance through the experience that I had leading the capital markets regulator in Nigeria. And my objective was to achieve what you've just described. So if you read the book and that is what you feel I've achieved, then I've I've achieved the objective that I had for the book, which is to teach about finance, to make people comfortable with finance, to understand what leadership can do, and to have a roadmap for how we can leverage capital markets in Nigeria and globally to solve some of the world's most difficult challenges.
In 30 seconds, sorry, we're out of time virtually, but in 30 seconds, tell us about your think tank.
Thank you. I founded the Oxford Global Think Tank essentially to have a non-partisan platform that will provide an opportunity to do research on topical issues that people are not as focused on. So our inaugural report was on reforming the African mineral sector to prosper Africa. We coined that phrase, Ramp Africa. And the idea is to think about ways in which we can transform the continent of Africa. In Nigeria, we have 40 minerals that can be exploited in commercial quantities. So I asked the question, why are we focused and haggling about oil and gas when we can have more? Why do we have minerals on the exclusive list? Why don't we decentralize so that most states can basically exploit whatever it is that they have, so that we can have more revenues in this nation, have more prosperity, have more inclusive growth, and so that more Nigerians can participate in the potential of Nigeria.
Well, it's fascinating talking with you. Congratulations. It was brief, but we got to talk with you, which is really good. Arunma Oteh was the former Director General of the Securities and Exchange Commission in Nigeria. She was former Vice President and Treasurer at the World Bank, and of course now an esteemed author and running a very well-respected think tank. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Charles, for the opportunity to share about my book.
That's it for this edition of Arise Prime Time.